like to welcome you for tonight, and thank you on behalf of the firm for coming. The idea for tonight came partly from reading Adam Kay's book. It's a great book, very funny, it's very sad, but most useful for me were the footnotes, because it's got all these excellent footnotes really designed to explain medical matters to lawyers. So I now know what a cannula is, and I understand why doctors get so excited about urine output measurements. I even know what to do if I'm there when the Pope dies. Adam's book paints a vivid picture of what it's like being a junior doctor, which is our topic for tonight. It's been read on the BBC. It's been translated, I think, into 25 languages or so. It's even recommended reading for the new Health Minister. So I'm enormously grateful, and so should you be, that he's agreed to make us part of his national sold-out book reading tour, and to charge us absolutely nothing for doing so. Looking around the room, it must be worth about £5 at least. So only he can tell you why he's not charging us, but he's doing this for absolutely nothing. It's a special delight to be in the same room as the writer of a book you like, and to hear him read parts of it to you. So it gives me great pleasure to begin this evening by welcoming Adam Kay, best known former junior doctor in the country, and to invite him to read from his book. This isn't going to hurt at all.
Thank you very much. That's very kind. So yeah, I was just going to speak to you a bit for the next 6 hours. I wanted to read something that wasn't in the book because they wouldn't let me put it in because it was too disgusting. And this is from when I was a house officer in the urology department. In the increasingly unlikely event that I find myself dictator of the world, one of my first acts will be the total ban of fancy dress parties. No one's heart has ever leapt at that particular line on the email invite. It's a hellmouth leading to inconvenience, irritation and eventual embarrassment. You'll end up either being the only person who's dressed up or the only person who hasn't. Or you'll pitch it colossally wrong, spunking an entire morning and 200 quid in the National Theatre hire shop, where every other guest has dug out some devil horns or a cardboard Prince Charles mask. Also, how are you expected to take a shit if you're dressed as Spider-Man? The final nail in this particular coffin was bludgeoned in for me one Halloween, when the fancy dress gods delivered 2 patients to the A&E department. Both were gentlemen in their 20s, both attended by ambulance, and both, unbelievably, fell foul of costumes which involved wrapping themselves up in household items. Perhaps there was a feature on it in October's issue of Cretin magazine. Patient T.Y. was reviewed by my friend Percy and presented to A&E extremely unwell with acute hyperthermia, which is a pretty impressive feat when it's -2 and you're basically not wearing any clothes. He had mummified his naked body with 10 rolls of cling film, and one evening of dancing later had overheated and dehydrated himself so severely he'd knocked his kidneys out and required a 5-day hospital admission once they recovered. My patient, R.J., went home after only a few hours, albeit with a rather more permanent injury. He learnt the hard way that if you cover yourself head to toe with gaffer tape, its removal not only exfoliates and epilates, but also circumcises. And I'm going to read an entry they did let me put in. This is from December 2010, at which point, so I'm a senior registrar in my chosen specialty of obstetrics and gynecology, or brats and twats as it's known. Parts and labour. Spending a sunny Sunday afternoon on labour ward with an excellent SHO, she asked me to review the CTG, which is baby heart tracing, for patient, and I agreed with her assessment that the patient needs an urgent caesarean section for fetal distress. They're a lovely couple, recently married, it's their first baby, and they understand the situation. The SHO asks if she can perform the caesarean while I assist. In theatre, the SHO goes through the layers: skin, fat, muscle, peritoneum 1, peritoneum 2, uterus. After the uterine incision, rather than amniotic fluid, blood comes out, a lot of blood. There's been an abruption, which means the placenta's come away. I stay calm and ask the SHO to deliver the baby. She says she can't, there's something in the way. I take over the operation, the placenta is in the way. The patient has an undiagnosed placenta previa. This should have been noticed on scan. She should never have been allowed to go into labour. I deliver the placenta, then deliver the baby. The baby is clearly dead. Paediatricians attempt resuscitation with no success. The patient is bleeding heavily from the uterus, 1 litre, 2 litres. My stitches have no effect, drugs have no effect. I call for the consultant to come in urgently. The patient is now under general anaesthetic, receiving emergency blood transfusions. Husband's been escorted from theatre, blood loss now 5 litres. I try a brace suture, which are big stitches to compress the uterus like a pair of braces. No luck. I'm squeezing the uterus as hard as I can with both hands. It's the only thing that stops the bleeding. The consultant arrives, attempts another brace suture. It doesn't work. I can see the panic in her eyes. The anaesthetist is telling us he can't get fluid into the patient fast enough to replace what she's losing, and we're risking organ damage. The consultant calls Mr. R, who is a very senior consultant, not on duty, but he was the most senior person any of us could think of. We take in turn squeezing the uterus until he arrives 20 minutes later. He performs a hysterectomy. The bleeding's finally under control, 12 litres. The patient goes to intensive care and I'm warned to expect the worst. The consultant talks to the husband. I start to write up my operation notes, but instead just cry for an hour. And that's the last diary entry that I wrote. And it feels weird saying this now, but at the time, I never told anyone why I left medicine. It feels weird because I go around the country, reading out from my book, and it's been printed, God knows how many thousands of times now. But at the time, it's just something I couldn't talk about. My parents obviously knew that I'd left medicine, but they didn't know why I'd left medicine until they read my book 7 years later. Even my boyfriend didn't know why my husband, we were married and didn't know why I'd left medicine, the details, until I was at an event at the Edinburgh Fringe, reading out diary entries. And that's not particularly healthy, I get that, but that's on me. I've sort of done my own therapy by talking about it. But when the junior doctors were coming under fire, I realised something much more important. It's not healthy for the public. The public need to know the reality of the job. They need to know what every doctor and nurse and midwife and pharmacist and physio, what every healthcare professional actually does. So the next time the Secretary of State lies, doctors are in it for the wrong reason, for the money, the public can say, of course they're not Jeremy, of course they're not Matt, of course they're not whoever the next one is. Why would anyone in their right mind do that job for anything other than the right reasons? So I've got so much respect for the people who do it, because it turns out I couldn't when it actually came down to it. And why couldn't I talk about it? And there's loads of reasons, and there's a big cultural problem in medicine where we don't talk about it. So it starts when you apply to medical school. You apply to medical school and everyone you know says, oh, congratulations, amazing, what a brilliant job. It is a brilliant job, it really is. The best job in the world. But no one ever mentions, the downside to it. There is a downside. The nature of medicine means that there are more bad days at work than good days at work. But we're not honest. They don't even check you're okay with the sight of blood. They don't If you wanted to be a train driver, they would assess you psychologically before you went into it. If you wanted to be an astronaut, if you wanted to go on Love Island, a psychologist would speak to you. If you want to be a doctor, nothing like that happens at all. Why? Because the culture says it's not something that we actually talk about. It's mad. And they're pretending to start to bring something like that in. But it's like a multiple guess thing where you choose an answer. And it's like, I don't know how many of you, when you learned to drive, did the driving theory test. It isn't a test of whether you know how to drive. It's a test of if your IQ is above about 30. So the driving theory test says, you know, before you turn left, you look in the mirror or the Sunday Times or the glove compartment. And I've looked at these example questions these medical schools are saying that are assessing if people are up to the job, and they say, you know, you've made some sort of drug error. Do you, A, you know, manage the patient clinically, inform the patient, inform the team, you know, incident form, blah, 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 blah. B, burn down the hospital, C, move to Rio. That's not testing if someone's going to be a good doctor. We need to think about that. We need to acknowledge that. And when I was at medical school, there was never any discussion about things going wrong. They teach you how to manage esophageal varices, and they teach you how they present, and they teach you, you know, all the pathophysiology. But no one mentions what it's going to be like when a patient exsanguinates onto your shirt your first month as a doctor. Because, like Newton says, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. And when something awful happens to a patient, when you're breaking bad news to a patient, it's unimaginably sad, difficult for that patient, that family. But it also chips away at you. And the word is not resilience. Resilience has become a sort of a bit of a... Resilience implies that it's your fault and nothing needs to be done by the system. So I'm not going to talk about resilience. I don't know what the word is, but we need to accept that if you're going to be a doctor, you're going to see some difficult stuff. You need to work out a way of coping. And there's evidence about how to cope. There's evidence for speaking to people, whether they're trained or untrained. There's evidence for that. There's evidence for taking time out. There's evidence for tea. There's evidence for meditation. There's evidence for religion, if that's your thing. There's loads of evidence, but we ignore all of that, and we say we're bloody doctors and we'll bloody get on with it because that's how it's always been. I don't think that's helpful. I don't think it's healthy. We use evidence if you're managing someone's, you know, any medical condition. You wouldn't do something there was no evidence for. You would ignore evidence. But when it comes to ourselves, it's so difficult. But at the moment, it's not talked about. When I started medical school, in 1998, it was the first year of a subject called communication skills at my medical school. And it feels mad. There was a time before communication skills was part of a doctor's education, but there was a time. And I started the year that they brought in communication skills teaching. And I remember leaving a ward round, a surgical ward round, and saying to the consultant, I need to go because, you know, this is our communication skills training. And the consultant saying, you can't teach communication skills, what a load of nonsense. And I go around various places and I talk about the idea that doctors are humans and they just randomly tick the box on the UCAS form. And that you need to think about how you can't just have this sort of infinitely thick emotional exoskeleton. You need to prepare yourselves. And I hear the same old guard of consultants saying, this is nonsense, you can't, you know, you've either got it or you don't. I hope in 20 years' time, if I'm still around, you know, it will be absurd that this wasn't ever brought up, much the way that communication skills wasn't brought up at one point. Because when I left, before that, immediately after my bad day at work, it was like I'd said I'd sprained my ankle. They were like, "Oh no, that's awful," but obviously you can do antenatal clinic tomorrow, right? Because there's no slack in the system. We know that there's no slack. You can't leave work on time. There's no slack in the system, so someone can say, you know, I think we should probably offer you a couple of weeks off. There was no one employed by the hospital to speak to people who've had, you know, terrible things happen. I suspect that if I'd have been offered a bit of time off, I might have taken it. If I'd been given a chat with someone, I might have taken them up on that. I might still be working as a doctor. But the culture says that shouldn't happen. So I've written this book, and it's very easy to get in touch with an author. You can, you know, a decade ago you'd have to write to a publisher or whatever. Now, you know, you can email me. It's, you know, people find me on Facebook page, on Twitter, whatever. I get dozens and dozens of emails and messages every single day, and a lot of them are from doctors. And it's heartbreaking the number of emails from doctors I get that say, "I've never told anyone this, but..." Why have you never told anyone this? Why am I your secret agony aunt? It's not. We need to get good at talking. You've got a responsibility. Your friends have got a responsibility yourself to actually talk about it. When I was putting the book together, because I left 8 years ago, I wanted to check that everything was up to date, that I was giving a fair reflection of what it means to be a junior doctor. I met up with loads of former colleagues, former bosses, and there would be, you know, consultants in their final year of the job, in, you know, 6 foot something former, you know, prop forwards. And they remember the bad days at work, their tragedy, their version of that story that I read out to you. They remember it in high definition, every detail of it. They remember from 30 years ago, the hospital, the ward, the floor, the name of the patient, what the husband was wearing, what was playing on the radio. You don't forget it. I don't know anything about psychiatry. I went on holiday, a medical school during psychiatry, but I'm pretty sure I had some degree of PTSD, because that story I read out would come to me. I'd relive it in dreams, and I'd wake up thinking that. I mean, it's now stopped because I've done my own therapy by going around and talking about it. I think the army probably have a better way of, you know, acknowledge that we can debrief things. But doctors are human. How many doctors in? So you're all human, and you forget you're human a bit because the patients don't want you to be too human. And that's because when you're reading out the results of the MRI of the brain, you know, you need to be absolutely, unimpeachably correct. You need to be God. You need to be Google. You can't make mistakes. But the flip side of that is you lose all other human characteristics, like getting sick, and getting sad. And I think one of the main reasons that doctors lost their fight at the time of the strikes was that people weren't thinking of doctors as human beings, and that's what led me to trick a publisher to printing out my diary so that people could realise what it actually means, what it looks like under the hood, that doctors are just normal people. I've also had loads of shit from people and emails. I've had 3 or 4 emails from doctors telling me I'm histrionic and doctors don't talk about that kind of thing. Fair enough, whatever. Doctors are human. And there was one particular antenatal clinic I would do, and I can't remember if this went to the book or not, but I was wearing a blood pressure cuff, because I'd moved house, because you're always moving house, because you know, move hospital once a year, and I'd registered with a GP, and my blood pressure was like 9 billion over 2 billion. I was like, I've just come off a night shift! And they're like, okay, well, so you're wearing a blood pressure And so I was sat in clinic, and a patient said to me, "Well, it's funny, you don't think of your doctor as getting ill, do you?" No, they don't. And that same clinic would routinely overrun by 3 hours. In the evening clinic, go on till 8. And quite rightly, the patients were saying, getting angry, shouting at me, "Oh, I've been waiting here since 5, my problem with the childcare, problem with the cars run off the meter." Not once in a year of doing that clinic did a patient say, "Oh, you probably don't want to be here either." Because doctors are human, and I think that's the sort of the subtle thread that runs through the book. The book's sold as a funny book of anecdotes, but it wouldn't have sold any copies if I'd have called it a harrowing polemic about the truth of what needs to be done. And so I think that's the crucial thing moving forward. If doctors are to come under fire again, and they will come under fire, 100% they'll come under fire, a few things need to change. I think doctors should be united. I don't think they should splinter off into lots of different factions. I'm aware, from people contacting me, there's a bit of this event that's a bit sort of Judean People's Front versus People's Front of Judea. But doctors are all doctors, they're all in for the same reason, they all apply to medical school for the same reason, and need to stick together, whatever pin you're wearing on your jacket, remember you're trying to do the same thing. But I think the opening up, being honest to people about what it means to be a doctor is important. And I mentioned something about, and I'll talk about this now to close. I've been talking about 3 hours. I had a really good speech I was going to read, and I just decided to talk about something else. So sorry about that. Imagine what you could have won. I talked about a guy called Roger Fisher, who was a professor of law at Harvard University, and he suggested back in 1981 that they should implant the American nuclear codes into the heart of a volunteer. And if the president wanted to push the button and kill hundreds of thousands of innocent people, then first of all, he himself would have to take a butcher's knife and dig it out of that volunteer's heart, so he could see what death actually looks like firsthand, the implications of performing an abstract action. Because no president, not even this guy, no president would push the button if they had to do that first. And similarly, I think that Matt Hancock and his successor and their successors forever and ever and ever should have to do shifts with junior doctors. And they'll say that it already happened, but it doesn't. So what happens at the moment is a chief executive takes around a couple of ministers round the newest wing of the hospital. It's been polished up so it's shining like a space station. They've put a couple of the least ill patients in. That's not what being a junior doctor looks like. Because being a junior doctor means palliating a cancer patient in their final days. Being a junior doctor means amputating the limb of a teenage trauma victim. Being a junior doctor means delivering a dead baby. So I defy any human being to know what the job actually is and then question a doctor's motivation, say it's about money. They'd be fucking applauding them, and they'd be proud of them, and they'd be humbled by them, and they'd be eternally grateful for everything that they do. So I think that's me done, and it's so important to spread the message, and it's so important the message comes from all one place and not from lots of divided places. Because look at any political party. We've got our 3 main political parties at the moment are in disarray because it's full of bickering people, all trying to do different things and then each of them failing to do the one thing that the party actually believes in. So remember that first and foremost, whatever your grievances are with the system, you're all doing the same thing. Okay, thanks very much.